All right, it's so good to be back with you again here on YouTube. So what I'd like to do with you all today is give you a nice introduction to the discriminant. This is the page that should go into your interactive notebook with the title, Discriminant. So the word discriminant just is a fancy expression for b squared minus 4ac. So the last couple of days we've been talking about the quadratic formula, how we can use it to find the roots or the solutions to a quadratic, and part of that formula, the part that goes under the square root, is called b squared minus 4ac. And that part is what we refer to as the discriminant. And the helpful thing about the discriminant is that its goal or its objective is it tells us the number of roots or solutions. So by looking at b squared minus 4ac for a particular graph, we can immediately determine whether or not that graph is going to have 2 roots, 1 root, or no roots at all. So we're going to look at each of those cases. So I'm just going to label them here, and I will do each one in a slightly different color so it's easy for us to see. So the first case is this. If we look at a quadratic and we calculate the discriminant, and the discriminant happens to be positive, that is telling us that our graph is going to have exactly 2 roots. So what would that look like? Well, here's what that would look like. That would be a graph that passes through the x-axis in 2 places. So here's a graph that's concave down. It's a parabola, and it's touching the graph over here, and it's also passing through the x-axis over there. So this particular quadratic or parabola would have to have a positive discriminant because it has 2 roots. So that's the first case. The second case is when b squared minus 4ac, or our discriminant, equals 0. And if our discriminant equals 0, then our parabola or our quadratic has exactly 1 root. So what would that graph look like? Well, here's what that graph would look like. It would be one of those parabolas that sits exactly on the x-axis. It doesn't pass through, but it just sits right on top of it. Now, it also could be a graph that's concave down, in which case it just sits. It doesn't pass through the x-axis. It just simply sits upon it. So our third and final case would be when b squared minus 4ac is negative. Now, if b squared minus 4ac is negative, then the parabola has no roots at all. And so we're trying to think, what would it look like for a parabola to have no roots? Well, that would mean it never crosses through the x-axis. It has no x-intercepts at all. So that would have to be a graph that is exclusively above or exclusively below the x-axis. So that's an overview of the discriminant. If you could take the next few minutes, feel free to pause the video, rewatch it, do what you need to do, but please make sure that this page, as you see it on my whiteboard, is in your interactive notebook under the page on discriminants.